Well, I want to welcome you guys to the Restoring Our City podcast. We're really excited for this episode. We have some very special guests that we are connecting with today. Longtime family member, Maryann Lukos. It's been so long since I've seen you, so I'm so glad we get to connect. And Jonathan Reynolds, so glad to meet you. And you guys are from Urban Reform Shy. And so we are so excited to learn more about you guys. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic. Enjoying this beautiful hot weather.
It is.
Yes, this is one of the best summers ever. Top 10 hottest summers ever.
Top 10. Oh my God.
One clarification, it's urban reformers.
Urban reformers.
Urban reformers.
Let's just educate each other, right?
Already got it wrong.
It's both.
It is both.
Edit.
Take two.
This is unfiltered conversations. We are keeping this all in. Messy conversations. But before we just jump right into kind of the mission and kind of the vision, tell us a little bit about yourselves. Jonathan, what do you do right now? Where are you from?
Yeah, I am from Chicagoland area, born out in the south suburbs. My parents were pastors, so full-time ministry. My dad also was a professor at Trinity International University up north. So that got me into ministry through that route. And I have been serving in full-time ministry for a little over 10 years now. And that's how I ended up meeting Maryann, was at Trinity, because she was a student there and I was a student there in undergrad. And so now I currently work at Salem Baptist Church. We're one of the largest African-American churches on the South Side, hugely involved in social justice things with our pastor, Reverend James T. Meeks, who has served under the tutelage of Jesse Jackson and has been a state senator for 10 years in the past, and has shut down a lot of liquor stores and shut down a lot of gang violence in the Roseland community for the last 30 years. So I'm excited to be working with them. So that's what I do. I work with their youth and young adults currently, and in my spare time, I ride my bicycle all over Chicago.
Awesome. That's some rich history you got working behind you. So that's awesome. So Trinity's the connection with you and Maryann. So Maryann, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing right now and where you're from, where you're living.
Yeah, so originally from Chicagoland areas in north suburbs, basically like Wisconsin. So not really. And
is it in DeKalb County?
It is in Lake County.
Lake County, that's Wisconsin. Chicagoland area.
Ish.
Urbana-Champaign is Chicagoland area.
Lake County. Okay, Lake County. Anyway, parents, full-time ministry in India. I was a teacher for 5 years after I graduated. That's what I did at Trinity. And then I recently just resigned. I was working in Waukegan with elementary kids. I was teaching 5th grade and then piloted the STEM program there. And so in October, November of last year, God basically was just like, quit your job. So I was like, okay, are you sure you want me to do that? Been helping out with urban reformers and then Mosaic and Waukegan as well. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now.
There's been this just conversation about having conversations, with so many tough things going on in the world. It's kind of crazy, but and I've started to see that, which is really, really great. And I think that's why I wanted to connect with you guys too, because there's a million things going wrong in the world, right? There's explosions, there's racial tensions, there's a pandemic, there's issues everywhere you look, right?
This is literally just the last month of 2020.
Right.
Just this year, right? So it's kind of crazy. And I think it's really important to have conversations that continue. And that's why we wanted to start a podcast and kind of get this going. And hopefully we can start to see change, not just from the conversation, but maybe that's what ignites it, right? And so tell us a little bit about Urban Reformers and what you guys are doing and just the organization that you guys started.
Yeah. Well, we're really based here in Chicago, and we're sort of in an incubation stage at this moment. This organization is very much so new with the onset of what happened with George Floyd and a lot of those social justice issues and Black Lives Matter movement heading to the streets and marching. Me and some other friends of mine were out marching, and we just saw the huge need for there to be a faith-based presence in the new social justice, the new civil rights, the new reform movement. And so out of that, I had a conversation with another guy. He's a co-founder of this organization with me. His name is Thomas Stovall. While marching on Lakeshore Drive in Chicago on a Saturday, about how could we put together our efforts and try to influence a movement with a faith-based or gospel-centered lens and action to it. So we said, why not start a nonprofit and see where it goes from there?
That's really interesting too, because you see things spring up all the time, right? And especially when a very significant point in time and moment like the incident with George Floyd happens, then you start to see people's voices rise, and then there's like similarities in lots of different groups, right? So how do you
Yes.
stand out from the noise? So you mentioned just being faith-based. So what sets you guys apart? Like what is kind of that unique piece of your organization?
Yeah, we really wanted to be gospel-centered. We saw the original movement in the 60s and the 70s with civil rights really becoming an international movement, but it was based in really the Black church. It was based from a lens that was an Orthodox Christian lens, in my opinion. And so with this new movement that's happening, and we just wanted there to also be a presence of young faith justice fighters that are there. So our organization, to be a part of it, you don't have to necessarily even profess a faith, but we wanted to practice the local justice issues in Chicago, try to scale that first, model that first, and those leaders of each section, neighborhood, chapter, we do require them to have a gospel or a faith-based Christian foundation. And so from there, we hope that we can influence the movement with a Christian philosophy and a Christian presence. And so that it could be a witness too, that young people are marching in the streets and saying, well, the church isn't there, or there's no new life happening in the church, and that the church is dead. Because there has been a big rift between the new social justice fighters, if you want to claim them as that, are justice fighters, and with the church. And it became very present in the Ferguson case that happened when, now I'm old, I'm 31, so I'm old now. Now when I was marching, it was 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds, you know what I mean? The Gen Z, has taken it. But ours was Laquan McDonald. It was Ferguson, and a lot of the people my age that were marching on those at those events, at those epicenters of where it was happening, was having clashes with the traditional churches in the neighborhood. Right. And I think a lot of that had to do with just a difference in the age, and us as Christians or the church not transforming with the times to be able to reach out to this new young group of people who are passionate about seeing injustices at least answered and spoken to.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you navigate that, I guess, in this current climate, right? Because it's you still want to inspire those young Gen Zs, but then also it sounds like you're very faith-based, and so you're still but you're still tied to, and you have relations with the church, right? Who they may still have clashes with. So how do you stand as a middle ground, or how do you navigate that challenge, I guess?
Yeah, I am such a fan and a follower of the gospel of Jesus Christ that I believe that not only by taking action, we can truly transform real injustices in a proper way, but also that I'm such a fan that I believe that nothing else compares to a group of young Christian people who are out there making a difference along with whatever movement is happening, that our witness is truly a witness. And so it's not from a place of the old school evangelism by which we're trying to get conversions, while we're marching, or, we're trying to, preach or say scriptures while we're actively involved. But it's how do we take biblical ethics, biblical principles, and apply those from our own personal, individual, or team as a unit in our own practice, and it be a witness in the midst of what's happening? How do we influence culture?
Yeah. So why do you feel like there was a rift between the Gen Z and the church? Because I think most of us here are millennials. I think our generation was a transition period. I feel like from a very Christian-based country to now almost post-Christian, almost European. So what do you think was like the rift between these two groups?
Yeah, it was a few things. It was the integrity issues that happened in the past with older civil rights leaders. It was political leaders that were older who were co-opting movements by speaking to them either judgmentally or just using them for their own benefit and their platform. It was their old philosophy being one that just doesn't work in a globalizing, technologically advancing, world. And yeah, I mean, new movements come, and it's like, in many ways, there were some successes with civil rights, but there were many failures that happened with some of the social justice movements of American history in recent 30, 40, 50 years. That, our social economic gap is just widening and widening. The stratification is just growing and growing. And we as millennials probably felt a little misunderstood in our efforts. But I think those were some of the things that played into it. And I think we did do a great job of establishing a new foundation that says at least a call for care, at least a call for compassion. And I think now the Gen Z is just literally running with it, because they even live in a different reality now, where their phone is diverse, their classroom is diverse, their experiences and their daily life is diverse, and they want the world that they live in to also be caring and accepting, where we could at least coexist in that way of diversity. And they don't see it happening, and they're very frustrated and upset with that.
I was actually more concerned about Toby's questions claiming that we're all European now.
I
want to cut you off, Jonathan.
Christendom state.
It's the tight jeans that he wears. That's what I chalk it up to.
It really is. It really is.
Toby's been European for several years now.
Yes.
He's got his American
claiming
NASA shirt on.
I know, right?
Competitive out here. He doesn't want us to be here.
I'm trying to prove myself again by wearing American flags everywhere.
Subtle jab. I feel like that's the state of the country a little bit too, huh?
I think we focused on that because as second gen South Asians, right, or first gen in America, really, we're faced with that struggle often. I'm sure Maryann has talked to you about it a lot, and I'm sure she can relate to a lot of the things that our race goes through in terms of that, in terms of like figuring out where we stand with our older generation when it comes to these social political issues, and that includes the racial injustices that are occurring even right now. And that's also like one of the reasons why we wanted to start the conversation in our own community, and bring you guys on board to reach out and kind of like bring up that there are challenges even outside of our own race in that same element. Yeah. And so if we just approach it as the church, right, or as we approach it as your organization would, and still like focus on the Gen Z, right? Regardless of the fact that there's differences from the older generation, it seems like there's still a movement and there's still interest and there's still a progression, right? And I think that's the main focus. And yeah,
our focus of the group is for 21 to 40-year-olds. So it is focused on a younger demographic. So that might answer some of the questions about how to engage different groups of people.
Yeah.
We saw the passion of Gen Z. We want to help give a platform for young people to step on and get involved in social justice, and to bring their churches and their communities to come get involved following after them in leadership. We want to help train young people in doing that. So hopefully that's the answer to what could be a church that might be growing smaller here in Europe, America, or maybe it is. It is also just being a witness to the Gen Z that's already out in the streets and saying, hey, we got a philosophy we can stick to over here, and walk and get passionate about that. But then also, like I said, we want to scale it in Chicago, mold it in Chicago. And, we have 77 different neighborhoods. One of our core parts of our philosophy is to practice proximate justice in your local communities and area. And so one of our passions is to try to get chapters in every neighborhood. And then from that, get them on board about certain major issues across the board in the city, but also allow for them to have a community of life on life happening in their own neighborhood to answer some of the issues that are in their neighborhood. So leveraging both spaces. But you do get a lot of people who either have a savior complex or they're just learning about what's going on and they want to try to change the world, and that's great. But we could have a lot more effect as a church, as people of God, as people just passionate about justice, if we really put our hands on things in our own context and advocated for justice in those areas. That could really help.
No, I was going to ask, can you guys share some of the issues you guys are taking up? And
Well, proximate justice is one of our cores of the philosophy is powerful prayer. We want person-to-person partnerships that's happening between people. It's not about building a platform. So that's the strategy. But then the demands that we have tried to get together are, one of them is decolonizing the local church, which is one that I'm most passionate about. We're going to start really thinking deep and working into that. You got predominantly white Christian institutions. Yep. You got the influence of a globalizing church, or the new phenomenon of mega churches that is dominated in many cases by white resources. You got, even from the music and to the publishing, a lot of what we encounter about what our Western Christianity is through a white gaze or white lens. We want to talk about what does it mean to have a more localized understanding of how to engage the gospel and break down some of those barriers that are built in our local communities to really, and the way we see it, it'll advocate more for minority groups in churches and in our communities. Well, juvenile justice is the one that this is a very radical view, but we just don't believe that kids should be put in cages, cells, or behind bars. And so in Chicago here, we have the Cook County Juvenile Detention Facility, which used to be the Audi Home, one of the first juvenile justice centers, facilities in the world that was built. We have the largest one in the world that I know of. San Francisco actually got rid of their juvenile detention facility, so we think that's something that we could try to do here in Chicago, and it was really set a precedent for 10 to 16-year-olds who are on trial to actually be claimed guilty or not. They're not even guilty yet. To have more freedom. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of abuse in the history of the juvenile detention facility, Cook County here, in Chicago, of putting kids in solitary confinement for weeks on end, them being left in there because they couldn't afford bail, because they didn't necessarily have a mom or dad or someone to come get them. It's a long history of injustices that are happening, again, to kids between 10 and 16 years old. And of course, when I went there, it was 98% full of Black boys. And Black boys are not the most dominant demographic in Cook County, so it's quite interesting. So that's one of the things. We want to just abolish the Cook County detention facility. That's awesome. That's one of our first things.
That is absolutely an extreme view, which is a good view. I mean, that's awesome. So I practice law in Michigan. I'm an attorney here. My firm predominantly does a lot of criminal law. I do civil litigation, but the criminal aspect of it, we do criminal defense. So we're right there with you. We've represented a lot of juveniles. One in which comes to mind, which is what was based on racial profiling. But overall, it's just this mentality of kids having to go through the system, and it becomes like more rehabilitative justice as the alternative. And how do we get them to really, and I've seen it from various counties. We have 3 main counties here: Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne County. Wayne County is predominantly Black. Oakland is predominantly white. So is Macomb. And I've seen the various judges handle cases of varying degrees in criminality, but also in how they sentence and also how they rehabilitate the child and what they're really focused on. Whether it's just a name on a piece of paper that stays a number, or a name on a piece of paper that, eventually transitions to getting a degree, or getting, their name on a piece of paper that's a little bit different from the court record. And I've seen, and I was just thinking about Oakland County. It's got one of its juvenile detention center. It's called Children's Village. Makes it sound so nice. It's like and these kids are like going there, not realizing all of your rights are just tossed out the window as soon as you walk in there. And there's certain things I do agree with, in terms of getting them to a place where they can get back to society. Some of them do need help. Yeah. What type of help are we giving them? But it's sentencing them as adults. I know that's a whole nother forum, which we don't have to get into, but that's awesome that you guys are like looking into those things. And
we see it as one of those things that, like, we now look back at slavery and say, why in the world were we doing slavery? Yeah. I think 50, 100 years from now, people are going to look back and say, why were we putting 10-year-olds in cells and in solitary confinement? Those are extreme forms of punitive judgment upon such a small kid that might be dealing with complex issues from a neighborhood that they were over-policed. And again, most of them are in the Cook County Juvenile Jail with nonviolent offenses, and they're still awaiting trial. So,
right.
The innocent until proven guilty in America thing is just not true. Governor Pritzker put out a public statement about his intentions to want to reform and try to scale back and shut down the juvenile facilities, not just the detention, but the prisons too. So it's, again, these are the movement is moving there, even politically. So we see that as an easy win. But we also were very concerned that you don't hear about this in church.
Right.
So that's really weird that to us, there's certain issues that no matter what party line, philosophy or discipline or theology you fall under, we think these should just be prominent things, and that becomes a huge issue that this isn't something that the church cries out about, speaks up about. Kids being unjustly abused in prison, the lack of investment in certain communities, the education issues in Chicago, and the colonization that's clearly within our church, even at this moment now, of a control of thought, theology, space, and place when it comes to worship.
And that's really interesting that you mentioned that too, because as we talk about these really heavy, big topics, sometimes for me, it seems almost clear cut, right? Where there's injustice happening in the world, and I love that your unique standpoint and position is being a faith-based organization that's tackling this, and there's a lot of organizations trying to fight injustice. And maybe we're taking a step back and just looking at the country as a whole. Why is it so difficult for people to jump on board? And and I feel like sometimes the space in which our country is occupying right now is very black and white or red and blue, or however you want to look at it, right? Why is it so hard for people to jump on board with something that seems clear cut?
Yeah, and that's what propelled us to come together and talk. It was unique. We felt like it was a God movement. Even how our team came together, like it seemed like God had brought us together about these issues that have pricked our heart and pricked our life, and so in that we sort of came together, and we're passionate about speaking out against those things. So definitely, I think it's a protection of a place of privilege. And that's not, critical theory or any critical race theory. That's just the truth. And you see it as the biblical ethic in the scriptures of how, again, Jesus has to come down and empty of himself, Philippians chapter 2, in order to do the work of the Lord, the Father that sent him. And so if that is a model that we follow, that's gospel-centered, again, a gospel-centered philosophy, how do we not spend our time protecting a place of privilege, but actually instead reposition ourselves to advocate for righteousness and justice? And so that protecting of a place of privilege, I think, is the position that a lot of places of power have found themselves in because of the integrity issue that has just been riddled through our country's history. From its conception of the Constitution, purposefully excluding people of certain races or backgrounds or genders, but still trying to say you advocate for John Lockean, right. Philosophy of liberty and justice for all. Come on. Right. And one of the things I just did a sermon at my church about the history of the first 4 presidents and just how they were having conversations. We put up letters and showed the conversations they're having with powerful abolitionists, with people like General Lafayette, who helped us win the Revolutionary War. And he says, I didn't help you win this so that you wouldn't liberate Black people. It was liberty for everyone. But they chose instead to keep slavery, to keep abusing their treaties with the Native Americans, to keep this place of power, while trying to say that they were men of faith. And so that has we could go down the history and see how that has riddled our history. And so we're really fighting we're fighting against 400 years of of all of this.
Oh, that's a great perspective. When we think about a place of privilege, and we're a bunch of brown people on a podcast, right? And sometimes we think about it, and we think about how we grew up and where we grew up, and you think about the old Michael Jackson song, right? It doesn't matter if you're black or white. But what about like we're looking at? Wait, how do we fit in?
Bravo, Jody. Yes. Bravo.
Play that in the background, right? But where can we get involved? Because there's this like fine line. I feel like I've been hearing conversations from friends who are like, oh wait, this happened to me, and there's this like, I don't know, self-motivating, or there's the selfishness behind it where woe is me, right? But how do we get involved? How do we support the fight against injustice from a brown perspective? And Maryann, maybe share your experiences of how you kind of got involved in this as well.
I've experienced racism, but then it's not the same thing though. And so when I was in second grade, that's like second, third-ish grade, that's when 9/11 happened. And I was in a majority all white school, and I got death threats as a little kid. And, kids blaming me for 9/11, all this stuff. So that was the first time I was like, oh, like I'm really different from all these other people, and there's some other stuff going on. And so I guess that, and then continuing in my life, I've always had a heart for this, and I never knew what it would look like. But I knew that this is something that I've always wanted to be a part of. And again, that question of where do I fit in? I'm like, I have no idea what that even looks like for someone like me. It's really hard because being Indian in America, we do have a certain set of privileges that we don't even realize. And so I've struggled with seeing certain people's, things on social media and stuff like that, of either they don't believe it's real either. They're like, oh no, racism is not an issue. There's not a systematic issue, da, 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 da. But that's part of it because we don't deal with the systematic parts of it. We have, yes, we experience racism on an individual basis. There's still experiences that we have, and we've had it with certain people, certain groups of people here and there, but on a systematic level, we don't experience it the same way. And so we have a lot of privileges that we don't even realize. And so for me, it came to really breaking down, like there's so much privilege that I have. When an Indian person is portrayed in media, typically we're like the nerdy people, the smart people, IT, hardworking people, like, we're not seen in a negative lens like that, right? And so coming from that side, and then also, I think the interesting thing is really looking back at our parents' generation of coming here. And so I hear stories of my mom and stuff when they arrived from India. One of the first things they were told was stay away from the Black people, the Hispanic people. You're going to get mugged or whatever it is. And then something would happen and someone would get mugged, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, yep, see, we were right. And then it's just set in stone at that point. The one thing that I've come to realize is this idea of, I've heard a lot of people say, like the old generation say, like, this is not our fight. We're not here to ruffle the feathers. We're not here to do that, right? Like, why are you getting involved in all of this? Because this is not our fight. And to deal with that, it's like, okay, I see where they're coming from, because in their perspective, I mean, when you think about it, a lot of the older generation, they came to America, they worked, and they got their money, and they went back. They built a home in India. They would go back, and so we came here to get the money to do the thing and then leave. And this idea of we're just gonna not shake anything up. We're just gonna come do our little thing and then stay out of everything else. And part of the problem is, like, you end up having kids. This is our country. Like, for me, this is my country. These are my friends that I'm seeing. These are my, coworkers or whatever. Like, this is where I grew up. And so my heart is here. This is my homeland, right? And so though we still have our motherland and we have all of our cultures and all those aspects of it, for me, the fight is here. Like, I'm getting involved because this is my people. Seeing how we have become white adjacent in our society, because it's easier to be white adjacent and to go alongside that and play that role, and fall into this model minority myth, that we came here, we worked hard, and see, we did it, but that was the whole, that's this myth that's there, right? That was created to pit this us versus them. Wow. And when you look at even when way back, like coming into America, they had tests. Like, you had to be at a certain intelligent level and academics, and you had to come to even immigrate here. You had to be able to profit this country, right? So they already are setting this up in this way. And even realizing we wouldn't even be in here if it wasn't for the Civil Rights Movement, for the Immigration Acts, right? Like, those kind of things opening up for even us to even come. And so much of us being here is thanks to the civil rights movement and all those things. And we come in here, and again, the thing based off, I can only speak from what I've heard, right, growing up and things like that, of it's not our fight, but the reality is it is, and especially is definitely our fight as believers. You know, it is definitely our fight to be a part of this.
Right. No, I feel like, no, I think you put that really well. And, you know, it's not delegated to just an individual experience, because you have, you know, your parents who went through this, you know, Toby and Sibby, I mean, you're in different states, different parts of the country. And we've kind of all grown up in some of the same communities. In the communities that you guys are in right now, Detroit and New York, maybe Toby, I'll start with you. Have you seen that? Have you seen kind of some of the same experiences that Maryann's been sharing from our Indian community? Just to validate that, have you seen that?
Oh yeah, I mean 100%. It's funny you say that. Even like a couple of weeks ago, an uncle came over the house and was talking, and he's just randomly got into this like spiel. He's like, all my kids talk about is this Black Lives Matter movement, and it's not our fight. What do you say to that? You know what I mean? Like, because he comes from such a different perspective. Like, what do you say to that? And you know, like I could start and be like, hey, you know, like start educating you, you know, whatever. But like, it's just that's like the first thing they think of. It's just like, yeah, it's just not our thing. You know, we're here. We again, you know. We did what we had to do in this, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s. We made it, and now like we just want to rest comfortably. But there's not really resting comfortably anymore, because your kids are in this fight now, and I don't think they realize that. Maybe they won't realize that, you know. And I hope they do, because you know we do have conversation with personally with our parents, and you know they're starting to understand, like at least like, hey, you know, this is wrong. There's a point in I think our history that we didn't realize it was wrong, you know. Just like you guys were talking about, like as soon as we get here, it's like these are the bad people, stay away from them. These are the good people, be like that.
Yeah, I was thinking, even as you're talking, I was just thinking about, it's hard for our parents, right? It's hard for that generation, because even us as first gens, we grew up with American history. They have not. They did not teach that in India. They missed this whole thing. They came in and they thought they were living through it, but they were just going to work and coming back home. They weren't even out there in society trying to like get involved with people. You know, like my mom's a big person to say, I'm just going to go say hi and bye and come home. And I'm like, well, you can't always just do that, right? You got to like have life or live your life. Like, but to her, it's risky to live life. And so I think you had mentioned it once before, or someone had mentioned it, Joby, but our parents made like the biggest risk decision to leave India and come to America. Every decision after that is like the most risk adverse decision, you know, from telling us who to hang out with, what time to come home, don't ride a bicycle because it's only 2 wheels, right? You know, it's just like the dumbest thing. It's like, why wouldn't they think, you know, this isn't our fight? Why wouldn't they think like, oh, we shouldn't hang out with people that these white people are saying are bad? Because like Maryann said, we're living white adjacent lives, and that's how you move up, or that's how you progress, or that's how you move forward. And that's the unfortunate response, but it's for us, right, to like see that. I mean, one of the things that I heard personally was, oh, well, you know, we had police brutality back in India too. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, those are like all the Malayali movies, like, you know, police guy like punches him and he like flies, and
I always think that's real
like,
life too. Is that how India is? Like,
you know, it's interesting you talk about risk adverse too, and I feel like people are using that as an excuse. Because you know, the conversations have been a little uncomfortable as this has been escalating to say, hey, real talk, are my parents racist? You know what I mean? Like, it's a really tough conversation to say, hey, are my parents racist? Are my uncles and aunts and all the people who did this noble thing to leave their country and come here, are they racist? And I've heard a lot of different opinions to say, well, no, they're just trying to keep you safe, or something like that, right? Or they're trying to, well, they just don't want you to get in trouble, or they just—
That was the most racist thing I've heard.
Exactly. You know, it's one of those things where it's they're trying to say it's not equating to to hate, right? Like it's not because I hate another race, or it's not because I despise them because of someone else because of the color of their skin. It's because of whatever aspect of the decision, right? Like they want to make um, the positive part of whatever result of you hanging out or coming home at this time or avoiding this crowd of people. They want to look at whatever positive light that is as the only factor into the decision, and not what the harmful effects of that could play into somebody's head, right?
Yeah. No, I just kind of wanted to touch on, this excuse thing, right? You were talking about, and I feel like I see that a lot, and it's hard because we have such a respect culture, right? Like respecting your elders thing. So it's very hard to like say something to them in a way, right? Like without, like if you have an auntie and uncle, you're like at Christmas or Thanksgiving, they're saying something, you're like, well, how much do I say? Without being, disrespectful, but then also bringing the truth, right? The reality of the situation. And it does take conversations. And I mean, I'll tell you from personally, like I've seen change in my aunts and uncles, but this is like 10 years of conversations at like Thanksgiving and Christmas and like, with my cousins and like having open conversations. Like this is years in the works. And so it's very possible. But then also I think when you're talking about, and that's the one thing I hear too. Well, India has oppression too. What about the oppression that's happening in India? What about the police brutality that's happening in India? And it's like 100% true. It's there. If anything, that should give you reason to wanting to fight this here, to understanding it here. Look at the caste system in India. Right. You know what I mean? And as believers, that's the one thing they always say: we don't do the caste system anymore because we're free from that. And so I think that part of it also in why it's more accepting for the first generation is because they know the caste system in India. So they're used to that system there growing up. So when they come here, it's like, oh, it's just another type of caste system. And so we're here with it, right? And as Christians, we still love everybody and we're not hatred to anybody, but not realizing that they're playing into the issues, right? By not saying anything, not being, not fighting against it, I guess, in a sense, by being silent, and you're playing a part in this.
Same thing. Like I've seen even my own parents like take a different stance. I know after George Floyd, and I think it's the capturing or the video coverage of actual injustice or racism being depicted that they never really saw in person, or they've experienced their own injustices. And I think as Indians, sometimes we can be passive to act when it comes to ourselves or even to another person. But when they saw that, even my dad was like, that cop should be killed the same way that he killed that man. And I was like, oh, okay.
One extreme to the other, huh?
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay, yeah. And I mean, it engaged us in dialogue and a healthy conversation because, at least I knew where their mindset was at from that point, And
at least they were angry, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's a good start. Anger.
Jonathan, I want to come back to you, hearing, our perspective, because I feel like, as these conversations have started to evolve and hearing, the brown perspective, I'm sure you've heard lots of different perspectives, not just from an Indian community, but other communities outside of the Black community or outside of the media or outside of wherever. How is kind of your the response been to the folks who want to engage in the fight? Maybe some of the, I don't know, the super ambitious folks who are just ready to just slay the dragon, so to speak. But
burn it down.
Yeah. How do you
Burn it
respond to the eagerness and then help channel it into the right direction?
Yeah, I mean, there's been huge responses that we've seen from people who just want to get involved, and it seems from the younger generation, and the climate is there. And across all lines, from the Hispanic community, Latino X community next door to us in Pilsen here, will probably be one of our strongest chapters, starting off this fall. But we've had different white people want to be involved, and And so, yeah, this new generation seems to be really passionate, thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement, which is an inclusive movement. We've seen across the board, every race, gender, type say they want to do it. And our on-ramp is just, hey, you're already out here marching, whether you have loose affiliations or you're directly connected to some organization. If you want to also be passionate about a virtuous or a gospel-centered platform of doing it, philosophy of doing it, come join us.
What can we do to get involved, and how can the public know how to support you guys?
Yeah, at our Instagram page, Urban Reform Chi, Urban Reform CHI. That's the Instagram handle. You can go there. And it has a link for our link tree, which takes you directly to registering for free. You can win a t-shirt or something to do that. I guess we got all the gimmicks.
Nice.
But to get connected and just so we can get people's information, we're really just trying to build a support base of people interested in coming and just interested in the organization. So it gives direct links for all of those things right there on the Instagram page.
2 different groups that will be doing some worship and then just learning about who we are, and kind of getting a feel of each of the people on the team, and again, kind of why we started, where our heart's at, and then also having a time to talk about the cause, right? About this juvenile justice issue, and really hearing our heart behind that. And then we're going to have DJ, and we're having a living museum, where we call it, like, experience. So it's all outdoors, but we have we have 2 people on our team who are very creative. We have Pastor Julie and Chelsea, and they are both artistic. So they're creating an art installation of this experience, walking through to learn about the juvenile justice system, and then so that people can walk through and learn about it as well.
So Tuesday, August 18th, from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. at Hadia Pendleton Park, 4345 South Calumet Avenue in Chicago, Illinois. Bring a mask. So
yes,
stay safe, everybody. Stay socially distant from each other, but it's a great cause. So I love the tagline: a gospel-centered community of justice fighters, and you get to hear your hearts for juvenile justice. So the Freedom Project, which is August 18th. So you guys summed it up perfectly at the beginning. It's a gospel-centered fight, right? Which we are all called to be. And if you're a believer in Jesus, we don't want to, be living in our lives of privilege, right? Jesus left heaven. It doesn't get any better than that, right? It's kind of crazy to think about that we don't see that sometimes, the little bubble that we're in. So that's inspiring, and it's a really cool, unique perspective that shouldn't be unique for believers. It should be something that we live out. So don't want to keep you guys too long. I appreciate you guys spending this time with us, and we look forward to seeing all the exciting things that God's going to do through you guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you guys so much.
Alrighty.
Keep us in prayer.
Take care.
Yes.
Will do.